If I can sync, so.
Okay. Yep. So you are live.
Welcome to the 30-minute hour. It's the personal development podcast for the seven-figure entrepreneur who's looking to level up and become unstoppable. I'm your host, Eric Twiggs, your procrastination prevention partner, and I've conducted over 28,000 coaching sessions with seven-figure entrepreneurs. Also joining me, you know him as the super CEO, the business strategist extraordinaire, and all-around good guy, Ted Fells.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you.
Monday. Happy
Ted,
Monday.
we're going to help some people today.
All right.
We're going to talk about how to benefit from your big mistake.
Okay.
That's right. See, there's one thing that I'm going to say something that's controversial right now, right? That being resilient is overrated. It's overrated, right? Because think about it. Like if you're resilient, that means that you snap back. You know, let's say it's a bad thing happens, you make a mistake, you're able to snap back to where you were before, right? That's overrated. What you really want to be is anti-fragile. Something called anti-fragility. And that's where you're actually better than you were. You actually benefit. That's right. Brandon is following us. Brandon Thomas Rennie. He says, okay to benefit from mistakes. There you go. But yeah, so you benefit from your mistakes. And that's what we want to get out of this episode. How do you actually become better from that big mistake that you made? So we're going to help some people, Ted. I'm excited. Ted, I can tell you're excited too. So.
Totally excited. I'm totally excited.
All right, just keep in mind, everybody, this is not your everyday podcast. We do things a little different. In addition to watching us on the various, the YouTubes, the Facebook, and LinkedIn, you can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all those places as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. So we've got several people that are joining us and commenting. That is a wonderful thing. So again, today we're going to talk about how to benefit from your big mistake. And we have just the guest to help us with that. He's an author, speaker, and he's a consultant. In his latest book, The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. It just launched in June. He just so happens to have a copy right there for those of you that are watching on video. He's a consultant through his company, Constancy, Inc., and he's also a senior advisor for the technology company KaiNexus. And he's also the host of the My Favorite Mistake podcast. And this is, I had the pleasure of being on his outstanding podcast, My Favorite Mistake. And this is Mark's second time as a guest on the 30-minute hour podcast. So please join me in welcoming back Mark Graban.
Thanks, Eric.
Great
to be back with you again.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I just think this is a fascinating topic in that if entrepreneurs could really master what we're going to talk about today, it's a total game changer. And you get to the point where you become unstoppable if your mistakes don't stop you and your setbacks don't stop you. But before we really get into that, I do want to give people the backstory. So talk to us about like the vision you had for your career as you were doing like your graduate work at MIT.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, things don't always go down the path you might expect in a career. I mean, Eric, you told the story on My Favorite Mistake about a job change that you made where, you felt like that was a mistake and it didn't go the way you expected. And I wouldn't say my original career path was a mistake. It changed. It took a detour. So, and then let me double check. I don't know if I made a mistake of not doing earbuds or headphones. Am I echoing through for either of you?
There's a slight echo.
I apologize for that. But So hopefully it's not going to be too bad. I'll mute when I'm not talking. But so my career path, what I thought was going to be, I mean, I was studying at MIT graduate school. I couldn't have gotten in as an undergrad. I'll say that. I think that was an absolute fact, but I was able to get in for a graduate program at the time called Leaders for Manufacturing. So this program, true to its name, was trying to help develop leaders who were interested in careers in manufacturing. And manufacturing leadership is what I aspired to. I had started my career at General Motors, and I survived 2 years of that. Learned a lot of good things along the way. And then after grad school, took a job at Dell Computer, and I thought I was going to go through different manufacturing leadership roles. And around 2005, you know, sometimes you get presented an opportunity where a detour opportunity for detour presents itself. I had an opportunity to join Johnson & Johnson and do some consulting in healthcare, trying to apply what I had learned around manufacturing systems improvements and leadership, and trying to apply that in a totally different setting in healthcare. So that's been kind of major focus since 2005, but I still work with other organizations outside of healthcare, because a lot of it comes down to, I think, as we're going to talk about today, it's about people, it's about leadership, it's about organizational dynamics. So it's not just about like, oh, well, we're not a factory. Like, well, there are lessons to be learned, and there are lessons, I would argue, that factories could learn from hospitals as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious, like, go back and talk to that younger version of yourself, that graduate school version. If you could be a mentor to yourself, what advice would you give to yourself based on what you now know?
We have an hour? No, I don't want to spend the whole hour on this. I mean, you gave me a chance to think about this in advance, thankfully. I think two things come to mind out of what could be a really long list. One is, don't be so hard on yourself or on others. I think that's something that I've tried to get better at, you know, all around, of, you know, not getting upset, not being judgmental about things. That's an ongoing journey. And then I think the second piece of advice, yeah, I think I was very much in what I've heard some people call the expert trap for a while, of saying like, well, I've got these degrees and I have this technical background and I'm an engineer and it's my job to figure out the answer and give it to other people and we'll move forward together. Like, well, that's not what I learned the hard way a little, you know, was that's not really the way to get things done. You've got to learn how, and I would tell my 22 or 25-year-old self, stop being the answer person and be someone who can help facilitate and draw ideas out of others and get people engaged and participating, not at the point of saying, well, here's my solution, let me try to get you on board. Like, no, that's too late. But like, what, you know, thankfully, I think I've had some good mentors and tried to learn the lesson and pass along the lesson about, you know, trying to engage people early on, like engaging them and understanding the problem together, understanding the causes of problems, like engaging people along the way is a different role. And I think a more effective role that I've tried to grow into.
It's interesting you mentioned, so the expert trap, where you feel like you have to have all the answers all the time, but you would advise yourself to engage people. I think that's good. I think there's somebody that's watching us right now that would benefit from that advice, in addition to your younger self. So it's interesting. Your book is titled "The Mistakes That Make Us." Your podcast is titled "My Favorite Mistake." I see this theme going here. So tell me more about like the specific life experiences that motivated you to focus on overcoming mistakes and becoming better from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe about 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, I started noticing some of that pattern around being hard on others. And, you know, I think some of that was not even just some of it was in workplace settings, some of it was in sort of an online way of, you know, writing blog posts that were, you know, critical about stories, things companies were going through in the news, being, I don't know, snarky as a word, or maybe, being unkind, or not trying to make a case in a way that was necessarily helpful, or posting, critical comments, disagreeing comments. There's a way to disagree with people. And I'm not saying I have that all figured out, but whether it's, Twitter, where I used to spend time on Twitter, nowadays it would be on LinkedIn. Like, there's maybe an art to disagreeing in a way that doesn't upset somebody. Like, even if you don't think, like, and I'm not trying to paint a picture like I was going off on big, huge tirades, but like there's this subtle middle ground where, like, I thought in a way I was being constructive, but the receiver of that message, or even someone else reading the comment, might have thought, well, that was a little off-putting. That there's that gray area, but like, trying to navigate some of that, and trying to focus on not being right, but being helpful, in terms of not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. So that led to kind of the exploration of that theme in a previous book that I wrote. And like any author, I'm going to hold up another copy again here. Sorry. It's called Practicing Lean, Learning How to Get Better. And really what I wrote in the first 2 chapters, it's not all mea culpa, but it's really sharing some stories about, here's some mistakes I made earlier in my career, things that I'd like to think I've learned from, things that I wouldn't do again. And then I had 15 other authors kind of share some of their stories in a chapter about mistakes they made, whether it was in the context of, what we call lean management. That's the reason for the title, Practicing Lean, or whether it was from a different context. Like all these stories that just kind of emphasize points that I guess evolved into the My Favorite Mistake podcast of, we all make mistakes, but let's make sure we can admit them, learn from them, and grow and celebrate the growth instead of, shaming ourselves or beating ourselves up.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect time to talk about this, because this was one of my challenges. Like for me, I'm to this day, like I'm still my worst critic, right? I'm harder on myself than anybody could be on me. And so in the past, if I made a mistake, I found myself beating myself up. In the self-talk would be, oh, I can't believe it. Talk about that as it relates to overcoming mistakes and the danger of that negative self-talk that can be produced.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, I've had, friends and mentors try to help me with this. And, I try to remind myself, and like literally, I'm going to show you the other side of a coffee mug where I had, some reminders printed. So like on the one side, it's my podcast logo, My Favorite Mistake. And I'll credit my friend Karen Ross, who's written a great book called The Kind Leader, where we talk about the difference between being nice and being kind, right? So like, nice self-talk, you might tell yourselves like, well, you made a mistake, but not really. It's no big deal. You're okay. And just want to brush it aside. Where I think kind, as opposed to nice, kind is more helpful and constructive. So I think, so the first reminder on the mug here is be kind to yourself, right? So I catch myself. I make mistakes all the time. I make a mistake and I might, in my head, or I might even say out loud, like, oh, that was really dumb. I'll try to catch myself like, well, labeling a mistake dumb or stupid, whether it's yours or someone else's, that's just not helpful. It's going to create defensiveness, or I think when we're upset, it's hard to think about the path forward. So I think we can be kind and acknowledge, look, I made a mistake, my mistake, but then try to think through, why did I make that decision that I thought was a good decision at the time? Was I making a bad assumption that turned out to be untrue? Was there information I should have gone to fill in that assumption, with real knowledge? And then, what would I do differently moving forward? I think that, kindness isn't just excusing yourself, but I think you can acknowledge it and say, well, what did I learn? What am I going to do differently? I think that, at least for me, that creates more of a positive path forward.
You just said it. I think it's all about staying forward and not staying in the past. I think if you can accomplish that, that's critical. And you said something that's critical. Hopefully people that are taking notes and paying attention, they wrote this down. There's a difference between being kind and being nice. Exactly. If you're being nice, you're kind of letting yourself off the hook. Whereas if you're being kind, you're still holding yourself accountable, but you're really not beating yourself up. Am I getting that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think some of it is just that intent around being helpful. Like, being helpful if you're coaching or leading somebody, there's a time you might have to challenge somebody because you know they can do better. Like in the moment, that might not feel nice, but I think it's, we play a different comparison of being liked versus being respected. Mm-hmm. Like, being kind sometimes in the moment, like if you're giving someone, feedback, you're trying to coach them, if you've pointed out a mistake that you think we can avoid repeating, that might be uncomfortable in the moment. They might not like it. They might not feel like it was nice, but hopefully then as you work through, then I think the next phase, like when we're in a workplace, is like, how do we prevent repeating a mistake? Like, I think when people see you're helping them move forward, then they may come around to say, well, yeah, that was helpful. That was kind. I respect that. And we could do the same thing around, the echo. I know a couple of people commented, oh, there was echo. And it's funny, we did testing before we went live and there was no echo, right? And there's supposed to be an echo cancellation mode. So I don't mean to just blame the software, but, we've made an adjustment here, right? I think we're managing the echo better. I apologize for not having headphones on, but, sometimes you test something. We assumed it was going to be okay. I don't think we, apologize for anything I did to create the echo, but hopefully three of us are in agreement. We won't beat ourselves up for that, I hope. Don't blame me. No.
No, we can't beat ourselves up on an overcoming mistakes episode. I mean, that just wouldn't be right. So let's get into the book. So, Mistakes That Make Us. That's the title of the book. Talk about like who's the target audience. The book you just happen to have right there. Who's the target audience, and what will they pick up from reading it?
Yeah, I was muted, so that's my latest mistake. I was trying to say, yeah, an author always has a copy of their book handy, or it's a mistake not to have a copy of the book handy. I think there's a couple of different target audiences, and I'll tell you, when I started writing the book, I was writing and sharing a lot of individual stories that came from the My Favorite Mistake podcast. And I was, writing, I think, for managers and for entrepreneurs and small business owners. And that's how the book ended up, if you will. So I think to answer the question, briefly, I think the target audience is, anybody who's a leader or trying to innovate or do new things. There are lessons to learn here for your organization. There are some, I think, individual lessons that we can learn, but the book was almost starting to take on the tone of like two different books that were mashed together, like the management book, which I think is what we ended up with here, with elements of like almost too much of just a self-help book, which I feel like, that I don't feel qualified to write that, or it was sort of two books in one and it wasn't really serving either purpose well. So I pivoted along the way and said, okay, well, some of the stories from my guests that were great don't fit the book. So there's the editing process, there's the pivoting, where I think most of the benefit is, to leaders and their organization, but there would probably be some individual benefit to leaders of like, can you process your own mistakes in a more constructive way? That probably helps you engage the people on your team in a way that's more constructive.
Yeah, you brought up something I want to get into, because I just think processing your own mistake and just ownership, right? I think for whatever reason, people struggle with just this whole idea of just owning it. And it's easier to point fingers and blame, and it's this, it's that. Talk about the importance of really first taking ownership.
I think that's an admirable trait. Like, and there's this pattern of taking ownership like that. That's really admirable. Most every podcast guest that I've had takes ownership of what they did instead of pointing fingers at others. And like one example comes to mind. My guest in episode 2, Will Hurd, was a U.S. representative at the time from Texas. He told a story about the first time he ran for Congress and he lost the primary runoff. And he basically admitted to not following the advice of his political consultants. That they told him a runoff is different than the first round of election. You need a different strategy. And Will, as he mentioned in the podcast, and it's in chapter 2 of the book, he didn't listen to him. He said, well, the strategy that got the most votes, but not 50% the first time around, clearly that was a good strategy. So we're going to use that same strategy again for the runoff. And he lost. So he didn't blame the consultants for they should have done a better job of convincing me, right? I mean, he owned his decision and the loss, but he learned a lesson from it. He ran not the next election, but he ran not 2 years later, but 4 years later. He followed their advice and he won the runoff. So I mean, he was kind of like the CEO of his campaign, if you will. And other leaders and business owners have come on the podcast and told a similar story. I think where it gets more complicated though is when people are in a workplace where they're going to get punished for admitting a mistake. That's where the blame game and the finger pointing starts. If they say by their nature or by their character, they would love to admit the mistake, but they know or they fear that they're going to get in trouble. And I think that's where a lot of the blame and deflection happens. So, sort of one thing I've come to believe, and I'll say, for anybody who will listen, is that, when people speak up, when they choose to admit a mistake, when they choose to speak up in a workplace, I don't think we can frame that as being just, courage or character. I'd say it's a function of culture. Like you have a lot of people who in their family or at their church or their whatever organizations they're involved in, that they are people who speak up. They are people who by nature admit mistakes, but then you put them in the wrong workplace environment. Now suddenly they've learned, I better keep my mouth shut because I need to keep my job. And right. So, and to me, I would say that's not a failure of the person. It's more often the circumstances that they're in, that leaders need to, help people feel safe admitting mistakes. And then they're going to, I've been in and seen workplaces where people have that ability to admit a mistake and get a constructive response from the organization. So guess what? They're going to keep admitting mistakes and speaking up about problems. A lot of it is just the workplace dynamics more so than saying good people, bad people, ethical people, unethical people. It's more a function of culture, I would say.
It's interesting because I've seen in some companies, you have something that's called a CLM, career limiting move, right? So
exactly.
It's just known if you say certain things in certain organizations. So, and the opposite of that is having an environment of psychological safety, right? Which we're kind of getting to. So let's talk about I know that's Google's big thing. They coined that term. Can you talk about what that is and why it's beneficial for a leader to get that in place in their workplace?
Yeah, there are well-known studies at Google about the impact of psychological safety. That term goes back many decades. And Google, my understanding is, they were inspired by the work of one of the leaders in that field, Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. And, I would recommend her book, The Fearless Organization, is one of the great books out there about psychological safety. But, Amy Edmondson or others who research and teach and write about psychological safety would generally describe it as an environment where you are able to speak up about things like problems, mistakes, asking questions, saying, I don't know, sharing ideas for improvement, feeling safe to do those things without the fear of ridicule, marginalization, punishment, negative effects. So it's an environment, it's a culture, it's a social condition where you can speak candidly. And so it really is, something that organizations like Toyota, as I feature in the book. I mean, in the literature where Toyota shares about their culture and what helps Toyota be successful, they emphasize fairly directly the need for not just physical safety, but psychological safety. And then you can see a lot of their practices that other organizations try to copy don't work as well in an environment of low psychological safety. So one quick example, Toyota is famous for their assembly lines or different manufacturing settings of having what they call an andon cord. There's a cord, like a clothesline or electric wires hanging above the line. And if you see a problem, if you drop a part, if you make a mistake, what you're taught, almost by reflex then, is to reach up and you pull that cord. Some lights start blinking, some music starts playing. Within seconds, a team leader shows up, not to yell at you for messing up, not to punish you for potentially stopping the assembly line. They're there to help. What's the problem? How can we resolve it? If it's an ongoing problem, let's do some problem solving. Right. So in that Toyota environment with that tool, and so in some factories, there's a big button. It looks like an emergency stop button. You hit that button. There are organizations that have tried to copy the cord and the light and the chimes or the button, and people learn very quickly, don't do that. Different culture, different experiences. If you were to bring somebody from like where I worked, General Motors 1995, which was an environment of blaming and yelling and shaming people, and if you were to drop them into Toyota, they would probably have a panic attack the first time you asked them to pull the andon cord. They'd be having all their PTSD flashbacks of getting yelled at by their managers at General Motors. And I think it goes to show, like, you put the same person in different environments. Now you can come around, you can learn to believe that, okay, now in this workplace, it's safe. People can come around to what their leaders are demonstrating and encouraging and rewarding. Like, organizations with a high degree of psychological safety are more innovative. They have higher levels of employee retention. They perform better. And that was back to the Google study. Final point I'll make on that is, they were trying to answer this question of all the different business units within Google, or I think Alphabet is now the name of the parent company. All these different types of products and business units. Why did some perform better? Well, the variable that they isolated by surveying people, the variable they discovered was the level of psychological safety. And I would argue that's not just correlation. We could be making a mistake of confirmation bias here, but I think there's strong causation. The higher levels of psychological safety lead to better performance.
Oh, I would think so, for sure. So Ted, definitely want to bring you in on this. I mean, you have your company, and I just being around your company, I know that it's a psychologically safe environment. What do you do to kind of instill that with your people?
Always look for input, right? It's interesting. Every Monday we have our team meeting, and this Monday, I kind of started off with just asking everyone how they're doing. I mean, I every person, like, how you doing? Or really, how are you doing? Because you hear about all these things that are going on, and you don't know in the world and the news, and you just don't know how people are doing. And so I said, I'm really going to let you know that that your boss, your president really cares how you are doing, right? Because if you're not doing well for whatever reason, then you're not going to be able to perform well. Your head's not going to be in it, right? So let me make sure you're good, right? So then, we went around and everyone just kind of said, yeah, I'm good. I feel okay, and I do that from time to time. And then, whenever, we end meetings, I always, kind of go around and just say, do you have anything? Do you have anything? And if not, just say, hey, Ted, I'm good. Because it's that's my leadership style, because I just think it's I'm letting them know that that I care, and that that we're here, and and then also say, and while you're out, you going to lunch or whatever, ask someone else how they're doing, right? Get into that, because then you stop at that point. Then, Mark, I'm not just asking you, did you get that project done? Right. But I'm looking at you and you're looking like, you got some stuff going on in your mind that, you should be able to. I mean, these people that you work with are people that you spend more time with than your families. Right. And so I think if you can just kind of figure those types of things out, then the other stuff is kind of easy. I mean, you can get together and whiteboard out most things, and and in most cases people are trying. Right. I mean, they're not trying to screw up. I don't know too many people that intentionally are trying to screw up, unless there's a,
Right.
There's a real, negative type of environment. So if they're trying, then you can help work through that. And then I also will say sometimes to my people, look, just eat the soup. You drop the ball, just eat the soup. Just eat the soup. Let's not go back and forth. We all screw up. And I let them know also when I screw up, and I'll say it. Eric, you've heard me. Hey, you know what? I dropped the ball. I was supposed to do this. I was supposed to have this done. I know this is what's happening. And, yeah. And so I have to take that on. I just think little things like that. I think as a leader, you set the stage, for that. And then you want to make sure that you have, your other leaders kind of see how you do it, and I think that all helps to make for a good, kind of environment.
Absolutely. Can I chime in on?
Sure.
I mean, I love what you said there, Ted, and to frame it within the context of psychological safety. One other expert I would point people to, his name is Timothy R. Clark, and his book is called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And what struck me, like what you were describing there, Ted, is caring for the person, not just what their performance is, but like for the person. And stage 1, as Clark calls it, is inclusion safety. Do you feel accepted? Do you feel included? Do you feel respected? And that's what I hear you talking about and demonstrating there, Ted. Like if people don't feel that, how are they going to move along? Stage 4 is what Clark calls challenger safety, to challenge the status quo. If people don't feel that baseline acceptance, inclusion, and respect, they might not take what feels like a risk of saying, hey, Ted, I think we'd perform better if we made this change. They might not be willing to take that leap, but then you're encouraging people to speak up. That helps. And then the other thing is just, modeling the behaviors you want to see in others. So like when the CEO extraordinaire admits a mistake, that sets a powerful example, and others then are willing to follow that lead. I'm like, well, if Ted can admit a mistake, okay, here it goes, right? And then you get a good response. That starts building psychological safety, and it starts building better performance, because now we can address these problems or not let improvement opportunities go unsaid. It's really, really powerful. I really appreciate what you were saying there, Ted.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I like how you said, just eat the soup. Just eat the soup. If you make a mistake, just eat the soup. I think that's critical, and I think if the leaders eating the soup, then it just trickles down throughout the organization, and that's how you you create psychological safety. So now this is a special segment I just came up with off the top of my head. It's Ted, Ted is called My Favorite Mistake. And this is where we're each going to go around and talk about our favorite mistake and how we benefited from it. So we'll have Mark start with his. So Mark, what was your favorite mistake that you've made?
How about a favorite mistake? I'll give you one.
That.
And so, like, when you came on my podcast, Eric, you told a story about a job that you took, and you thought it was a mistake, but you stuck with it, and you learned some things. And so my story's not exactly the same, but it was on one level a mistake in taking a job. So coming out of MIT, coming out of grad school, I took a job with, I'll just say, a major computer manufacturer based in Austin, Texas. I'm not really disguising well where that was, but I took that job. It was a hot company to go to in 1999, and I got to do some interesting work there, and I met some great people that I'm still friends with. But sometimes you just get to a point where, like, I don't think this is really where I want to be long term, in terms of cultural fit and what have you. And now I was able to kind of finagle my way out of that mistake about 2 years later. I found a startup company in Austin, Texas, and the job that I took that was a mistake opened doors to that later job. But more importantly, working in that job in the computer company that wasn't really a great fit, that's where I met my wife. So that was a great outcome from a job mistake, if you will. Man. It wasn't the worst mistake, and I think that's another distinction, right? A favorite mistake isn't necessarily your biggest mistake. So there were definitely positives, and we have our 22nd anniversary in October.
Oh man, that is awesome! Congratulations. And I think that's inspiring, because sometimes you think something, you make a mistake, but it can always work out in ways you don't see it benefiting you in the future. So I think you just have to keep that right perspective when you do make a mistake. No, that's excellent. Okay. So Ted, favorite mistake?
It's like my favorite mistake. Favorite at the time, it didn't seem like a favorite mistake, but when I used to work for the federal government before I started the company, and it was an IT organization, and I was like a project lead, and we were installing computer networks all over the country, and we were having this offsite, with all the senior leadership, and they were talking about all these things that we need to do and satisfying our customers and being able to implement new technology and all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest things was really talking about, like, standardization and configuration management and those types of things. So again, I was a much younger guy at that point, and I was that I thought I knew everything about technology, and I'd have my teams, and we'd go out there and we'd install all this stuff. And one of our locations reached out and said, "Hey Ted, we have all this new software licenses that came in. Can we just go ahead and install it?" So back then I'm thinking, version 1, version 2, version 3, it's the same thing. Just go ahead and install it. So they went out and they started installing all the stuff. And so when we go back to this, while we're at this offsite, we all get together and we're all in this big room. And then I guess the word gets around that this particular location had upgraded their software, right? And so, the associate commissioner in the division, he and I have always been really close. We're at the meeting. He's just like, "Oh, who told them that they could do that?" Right? And everybody's looking around like, I don't know. And I'm like, "Oh, well, I did." And I tell you, for about the next 20 minutes, he was just killing me in front of everyone. And I was just like, oh man, this is the worst. Like I just felt like I just shrank to like the smallest person in the room. And it was just like, ah. And again, we had always had a great relationship. And I was just so like embarrassed and frustrated and all of that. And I knew I would never do something like that if I was in a leadership position, right? I would never do anything like that. But I went through this. And so later, because we were all at this offsite. And so later, I was furious. And so I called the front of the front desk of the hotel, and I was like, give me this guy's room number, because I was going to go and deal with him direct. And again, he's my boss's boss, because I was still pretty young. So that's just not going to happen, Mark. I don't care who you are. I've never been dealt with that way. So I called his room, and he was like, oh, I need to speak to you, Mr. So-and-so. And he said, come on through. So we came in, sat down, and he was just like, yeah, I know you were probably really upset with that. And it's like, yeah, I know you probably wanted to punch me in the chest. I said, no, that's not where I want to punch you, sir. I'm going to punch you someplace else. And then he went into telling me about, this whole thing was around standardization and configuration and all that kind of stuff. And, kind of painting the big picture. Because at that point, I didn't really understand the big picture. It's like, Ted, you thought you just installed the software, but you didn't think that there needed to be training, right? So you had a whole bunch of people that, weren't trained to use that next version of software. There's a mission, right? And that mission could have been impacted for people not being able to do their jobs, of certain systems, just all these things that I didn't even think about, and by the time we finished the conversation, I really understood it. And so I've always kind of thought about the big picture from that, even today. And even with my team, I always will, break out. We got to understand how all these pieces come together. And, and I always go back to that, and I share that, that story, with them. But yeah, at that time, yeah, it wasn't a good thing. Again, I would have done it differently to get that message through, but that message did get through loud and clear. So yeah, that was one I still feel some kind of way now talking about it, but yeah, you get through it and learn. So
that's awesome, man. Again, you took some positive things that have benefited you later in your journey. And I know for me, and I've shared this on Mark's show, my favorite mistake was I left. I was with this company and looking for a change, and a lot of people were going to this other company. I won't say the specific name of the company here, but so a lot of people were going to this other company, and I decided I'm going to go there too. So I go, and I remember the first day I knew I made a big mistake. Like the first day, I was just like, oh. But the only thing, and somebody had put in the comments section about ego, the only thing that kept me from like picking up the phone and calling them my old company back was my ego. I didn't want to look like, oh man. So, but I knew it was a mistake. And for a long time, I beat myself up while I was there. But one thing happened was that I was exposed to something called situational leadership. Like we took a course, Kim Blanchard has the book about situational leadership. So we took this course. And the benefit from that whole situation is that the people that I was supervising, they were all at different ends of the spectrum. And prior to that experience, all the people I was supervising were high-level people who I could just give them minimal information and they could just take it and run with it. These were people who some people you had to literally spell things out step by step. And I learned from that, and it's benefited me to this day. And had I not made that mistake, I don't think I would have been as effective coaching people today, because I coach people who are at different ends of the spectrum. So definitely, it's like that quote that failure isn't fatal, but that failure to change might be. So it's definitely something to think about. So that's my favorite mistake. I'm glad we got that off our chest. And those of you watching us now, feel free to type in your favorite mistake in the comments section. We want to get that out there. And we're just trying to emphasize the fact that it's okay to make a mistake. What's not okay is to beat yourself up. What's not okay is to fail to eat the soup. So there you go. All right. Good. So Mark, I know you're on a lot of podcasts and you're constantly getting asked all kinds of questions. What's a question that you never get asked that you wish people would ask you?
That's hard. I'm not often speechless. I usually have something to say. You gave me an opportunity to think about this one in advance, and I'm kind of stumped. So I don't know. It's hard to come up with a good answer for that. Like part of me says I don't like. For some reason, my brain goes to 1980s baseball. Who was your favorite 1980s baseball team? Nobody's asked me that. Maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe I shouldn't want them asking me that. But the answer is the 1984 Detroit Tigers. For what it's worth, which isn't much, maybe. But
all right. So nobody's asked him. This is a different podcast, right? On all the other shows, he's never talked about that baseball team. So there you go.
My absolute love for that 1984 Detroit Tigers team. I cannot emphasize that was the best baseball team ever.
There you go.
I'm making that a much stronger take than it probably should be.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, good stuff. So we're coming down the home stretch. We're at the point of the show where we're doing the final segment. It's called Write This Down. And this is where we each go around and talk about at least one idea that was discussed on this episode that the people need to write down so they can level up. So, Mark, again, you're our guest of honor. What's something from this episode that the people need to write down?
I'm going to call back to what Ted shared earlier because it was such a good demonstration and such good advice for other leaders. So here's what I would say. Write this down. As a leader, as a CEO, as a leader of a team at any level, it's okay to admit a mistake to your team because people might be thinking like, oh, well, I can't let my team know I'm not perfect. I'm like, newsflash, they know you're not perfect. It's okay. It's not going to crush their spirit. It's better, like they will respect you more for admitting the mistake, taking ownership of it, and then demonstrating how you're going to, am I using the phrase right, eat the soup? How you're going to move forward in a more constructive way. So Ted, thank you for sharing, your experience with that. And it's right in line with what the advice would be of how to build psychological safety, and I think how to build follower-ship as a leader. Be real, be authentic. That's not going to scare people off. I think generally people appreciate that. You'll be better off.
Awesome. It's okay to admit a mistake to your team. Newsflash. There you go. Thanks for that, Mark. All right, Ted.
So for me, one of the biggest things kind of goes back to, what I shared before is I aim to make people want to do what I need them to do. Right? If I can make you want to do it. Right. When I listen to some of my team members and they're like, man, we just want to do this for Mr. Failed. When I hear that, I'm like, man, he's a younger guys. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm like, man, I mean, we want to do it. We want to do it for you. Right. Because sometimes you hear about folks that, man, your team, they're willing to run through a wall for you. And I don't want them running through a wall literally, but, the fact that they'll, put in that extra because, they don't want to disappoint you and they want to deliver for you. Then I have to say, okay, now I must be doing the right things. I must be saying the right things. I must have the right environment, the right culture, right? Like I said, everyone's not starting a meeting off saying, how's everyone in the room doing, right? But I don't necessarily need to do it like everyone else, right? I need to find a way because at the end of the day, you're trying to get your team, from point A to point B, and that's up to you to be able to lead them and come up with what works, for them. And so jumping up and down, throwing stuff around, that's just never been what works for me. And so, yeah, for me, I just think it's, make people want to do what you need them to do. And, and Eric, I mentioned this, and I practice it all the time. Like, again, I shared this, Eric, you've heard this a million times. If I go to a restaurant, I'm trying to establish a relationship with the server. Why? Because I want them to give me great service. Right. And Mark, when they go in the back and they get my food, and if that roll falls on the floor, I want them to give me another one. I can't see it, but I want them to think, man, that guy's a nice guy. Right. He was nice to me. He asked me my name. He asked me how I was doing. Right. So then when they come back and then at the end of the evening, you have no problem tipping. You have no problem tipping good service, but you kind of set the stage for that whole experience just with how you engage with that person and treated them with respect, right? So then when you go talk to a client, that's easy to do. Like, you do that all the time. When you're talking to your employee, you can do that because you do it all the time. So it's not something that you just gotta, that you're, it's all authentic, as Heather mentioned, right? Got, and once you start doing that all the time, I mean, then it just comes natural. It just comes natural. So I want to, make people want to do what I need them to do.
Write that down.
Yeah.
Make people want to do.
If I may, real quick, and I love what you're saying there, and it's just, focusing on the person, not just the performance. I think then leads to better performance, right? Because people know you care about them, Ted. They're more willing to go above and beyond, as opposed to leaders who are like, it's all business. We just have to be like, let's show me your numbers and show me your action plan. Like, well, no, we're all people. There's more to work than just that narrow focus on, performance.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So for me, like, as if I'm a CEO, the last thing I want is to have an organization of people who don't make mistakes. I wouldn't be happy with that. I wouldn't be happy if we're never making any mistakes. That's telling me that we're not growing. That's telling me that we're not taking risks. That's telling me that we're not stretching ourselves. So mistakes can be a good thing, but it's all on how you handle it. And I think you have to do what both Mark and Ted have said throughout this episode. You have to create that environment, psychological safety. You have to be careful how you respond to the mistake. One of the things, like when I'm working with people, I put out a challenge, especially with somebody that's fairly new, work to not make the same mistake twice. Kind of set that as a challenge.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Because I think if you get to the point where you don't make the same mistake twice, you become highly effective if you're just not making that same mistake over and over again. So I think it's all about the right perspective on mistakes, but it's impossible to grow without making mistakes.
Can I share one thing real quick, Eric?
Absolutely.
So the start of chapter 4, the quote that I used is from Akio Toyoda, who was recently the CEO of Toyota Motor Corporation. He's now the chairman. He said, it's in Toyota's DNA that mistakes made once will not be repeated. Now, that's aspirational. That's the ideal. But I think we can find a balance where there are certain mistakes we should try really hard to prevent. Like in the realm of healthcare, we don't want to give people the wrong medication, the wrong dose, do the surgery on the wrong side. We should work really, really hard to prevent those mistakes. But if some sort of small scale mistake happens, you absolutely need to learn from it. Like, we almost brought the wrong patient to the operating room. If you can't admit that, If you don't have the psychological safety to admit that, it's going to get hidden. It's going to get covered up. The organization can't learn from it. And then at some point, sorry for clapping my hand into the microphone, my mistake. You're doomed to make the form of that mistake where the patient actually does get the wrong surgery, right? So that's a different situation than we're innovating. The risk of doing the wrong marketing campaign might not be that high. That's a time to say, yeah, we can't completely play it safe. Let's take some risks. Let's go test the change on a small scale so that we can learn and avoid a big failure. A lot of it's really situational, but I think we can try to prevent mistakes, but then when they do happen, make sure we can be open about them and learn instead of focusing on the blame game and punishment. Sorry, I climbed up on my soapbox there. I said it was going to be real quick.
No, that's a great point. So Mark, we definitely want to thank you for everything you've shared. And please let the people know how they can get a copy of this great book and how they can connect with you.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking that. People can find the book, The Mistakes That Make Us. It's available through Amazon in different countries. They can also go to mistakesbook.com is the website. They can download a free sample. They can find links to buy it through different online bookstores if they want to buy a signed copy directly through me, or buy a box of books for their team. They can do that, and they can contact me, and for whatever reason, mistakesbook.com.
Mistakesbook.com. Make sure you go pick up that copy and buy one for your friend, buy one for your coworker, buy one for your business partner. There you go.
Sure.
All right. And don't forget to share this show. Don't forget
the show.
That's right. That's right.
Show.
Don't keep this a secret. And also don't forget that you can go to Apple Podcasts, you can go to Spotify, and you can hit the subscribe button. So that way you'll never miss another episode. And again, thank you, Mark Graban, for your awesome content. That's our time for this week on the 30-minute hour. Until next time, have a great one.
Thanks to you both.
Thank you.